Hello. So I thought I would do the balance reading again. I already recorded it, but it came out kind of grainy, so we'll see what happens. I apologize for my hair. I just kind of woke up, like, rolled out of bed. So anyway, I'm going to go ahead and do a random draw from Decoding the Human Body Field, just because it tends to be relatively profound in my experience. Edgar Mitchell, former astronaut and founder of the Institute of Noetic Sciences, and his collaborators have applied similar ideas to the study of consciousness, which he believes is holographic and claims arises as a result of phase conjunctive adaptive resonance. This is a mathematical term that describes how resonance takes place. Entities in the universe, including consciousness and other non-material things, meet or move into union when they resonate because they share similar conjugate energetic relationship through their wave phase relationships. Those phase relationships carry information. Both Laszlo and Mitchell and others describe mechanisms that so far have not been measured explicitly, or have they? Peter's matching experience seems to indicate that he has in fact found a way to measure the effects of the holographic resonances of the human body fields and the structures in space that are created by these resonances. His matches reveal the conjugate systems between the body field and the physical body. So when you're talking about balance, I think that's really, really relevant, partially because if you think about, they said, in space, there are both tangible and non-tangible, or, physically you can touch something or that's tangible, or something is non-tangible, like a thought or a feeling, an idea. It's not something you can touch, but it's an actual thing. It's a noun of sorts. So in any case, I do think it's interesting and relevant that they just said basically that they found a way to measure the effects of the holographic resonance of the human body field and the structures in space that are created by those resonances. So when you think about things like Reiki or a lot of energetic field kind of work that's done when you get, acupuncture, when you get any kind of, like even when you go to yoga and you're recentering your energy, any kind of energetic work that's done on you affects the balance of your... Something just fell down my chimney. Well, Merry Christmas to me. Yeah, I don't know what that was. Anyway, we're just going to keep on going like that never happened. Anytime you make an adjustment like that, you are effectively informing both the universe as well as your own body field what kind of adjustments you'd like to have. So, I don't know if you guys have seen that meme. I call it the memes. But it's like this little boy who's laying on the ground, and all you see is like a boot on his head. And it looks like he's being stepped on, and it's really horrible, and you feel bad. And then in the next picture, it's zoomed out a little bit more, and you can see that his hand is inside the boot. So he's stepping on his own head. It's just kind of funny because it's, spiritual awakenings and enlightenment is a little bit like that. Like you feel so very stepped on by the whole entire world until you can take accountability for some of your own stuff that you're going through. So in any case, that's what this is all about, is resetting all of those energetic fields inside of yourself so that you can find some type of middle ground to stand on that's solid and going to be a good foundation for you to grow from. I love this book, The Brain That Changes Itself. I'm going to go ahead and draw from Norman Doidge. He's an MD. But that's what the brain is just gray matter that can be reformed. It's kind of like Play-Doh or something. It's plastic. It's like that goo that you used to get in the eggs. Like, I don't know. It changes over time, and I'm going to read from right here. This is where my eye was pulled. Currently, Taub is studying with length of training, what length of training is best. This is page 149. In Decoding the Human Body Field, it was page 127. But anyway, this is 149. Currently, Taub is studying what length of training is best. He's begun to get reports from clinicians that 3 hours a day may produce good results, and that increasing the number of movements per hour is better than undergoing the exhausting 6 hours of treatment. What rewires patients' brains is not mitts and slings, of course. Though they force the patient to practice using their damaged arms, the essence of the cure is the incremental training or shaping, increasing in difficulty over time. Massed practice, concentrating an extraordinary amount of exercise in only 2 weeks, helps rewire their brains by triggering plastic changes. Rewiring is not perfect after there has been massive brain death. New neurons have to take over the lost functions and may not be quite as effective as the ones that they replace. But improvements can be significant to those seen in Dr. Bernstein and in Nicole von Ruden, a woman who was afflicted not with a stroke, but with another kind of brain damage. So I'm going to stop there because then it tells Nicole's story. So that takes us to page 150. And those were just random draws. It's a really interesting book. If you ever have time to, it's like an anthology of entries or kind of journal entries that famous brain neurosurgeons have made of their own interests. It's very interesting. But in any case, give it a look if you want to. When you're talking about balance and talking about kind of things that make us feel off kilter, I think sometimes when you're looking at the plastic nature of the brain and how to rewire it, this massed practice or concentrating an extraordinary amount of exercise in only 2 weeks. They say that you can change a habit within 27 days or something like that. 27 in there somewhere. But I also think that, muscle memory is something that a lot of bodybuilders and people who like to train rigorously for various different events they depend upon it. And it's helpful in triggering memories and triggering kind of old images or forms. I don't know why forms came to mind, but that's just what came out. Yeah. And it does say rewiring is not perfect after there has been massive brain death. Well, when you're talking about things like, the dark night of the soul or something like that, where although your brain is not dying, it kind of can feel like it because your fundamental ideas on how things are formed or your structured mind is changing itself. So rather than seeing the little boy as being stepped on, you're seeing the little boy's arm inside of his own boot, stepping on himself, just cracking a joke, It's a paradigm shift. It's a currency shift that I think is relevant to balance. Same thing with love, money, business, everything has a balance to it. And that ability to take a step back and say this is where the imbalance is coming from is a valuable step, even though it's uncomfortable sometimes. And I just think that, being able to rewire those things that are not working is just as valuable as being able to acknowledge those wires that are really clacking. So I think you got to give yourself credit on both ends and say, this is where I'm being successful. This is where I'm being distracted. And whatever, sorry guys, it's really bad. Wherever the imbalance is where you need to kind of readjust, I guess, personally. So, in any case, do as I say, not as I do, obviously. I think a lot of people struggle with balance, myself included, but time management is hard, and so is figuring out what's going to work best for you in your life. So, in any case, I am going to do a little tarot card read to go with this balance reading. I also just wanted to talk about yin and yang. A lot of people, I think, misunderstand the yin and yang energy. And in the first balance reading, I did just briefly touch on, electrons and protons. So protons have a positive charge and electrons have a negative charge. And then there's a neutral center that they, fly around, and that's what makes an atom. When you're thinking about balance, you can think about the number of negative versus positive protons and electrons going around an atom. That's kind of the basics of a lot of what we understand as the physical world. But then you could also think about balance as being a system. So within a system. So when you're looking at a baseball team, if I'm a really good pitcher and I can pitch the ball really fast, it doesn't really matter if nobody can catch it. Which is kind of a fun fact of life, that if I'm pitching in a way that is really effective but also not able to be completed, then that's going to cause some problems down the line. Same thing with something as simple as sales. When you're shoving sales down a pipeline, you're waiting for them to come out the back end. Sometimes people have front of the house openers and back of the house closers for sales. Sometimes you do all of the above as an agent, or as a representative of the company. It is your job potentially to inform people of the history or something of that nature while you're pitching, so that when the person gets down to the actual nuts and bolts of the sale, they're not answering questions about the background of the company. There's a lot of different things that can affect balance and a lot of different expectations. For me, what is a balanced breakfast may fit in a smoothie jar. For somebody else, a 235-pound man, that may not be enough sustenance for the day. They may need something like some eggs, some bacon, some grits, some, I don't know what you would, oatmeal and some cereal, bagels with, I don't know what you guys eat for breakfast, but I'm just trying to say these options that we've got for balance gives us sometimes a cluttered idea of what that should or could look like for ourselves. And I think when thinking about shamanism or spirituality, just know that there's not really a right answer. It's more like a mathematics class. So what equals 5? Because there's not really a right answer to that. It's 2 plus 3, or 1 plus 4, or is it 4 plus 1 and 3 plus 2? Or there's permutations of this. Is it 1 plus 1 plus 1 plus 1? You can break it down in any way that you really want to. Your spiritual journey is yours. And because God knows all of us, maybe by different names or by different energy sequences, whatever floats your boat, finds your lost scientific remote. It's really, when it comes down to it, you're going to go through the process in a fashion that is appropriate to you in your life, relevant completely. Kind of like someone speaking your own tailored language to you. It's kind of how I've experienced it, at least. I'm going to go ahead and flip. This is The Spirit of Shamanism by Roger N. Walsh. I just flipped to page 130. The nature of spirits. What is a spirit? The Oxford Dictionary defines it as a supernatural, incorporeal, rational being or personality, usually regarded as imperceptible at ordinary times to the human senses, but capable of becoming visible at pleasure, and frequently conceived as troublesome, terrifying, or hostile to mankind. Wow. That's pretty intense, but that's That's what it says. This has probably been the most common view of spirits throughout human history. However, if we set aside historical notions such as these, as well as our own preconceptions, we need to ask questions such as: are spirits part of or separate from the medium or shaman? Are they mental or non-mental, material or immaterial? And are they expressions of health or pathology? In short, what is the physiological and ontological status of spirits? Whoa. Okay, so I think this is a really great example to just kind of drop in here the discussion of epistemology and ontology. I actually discussed, I might just go ahead and upload the other video as well because it had some interesting stuff that's kind of relevant to this amount. But it goes to prove that each of us goes through our journey at a different pace. Excuse me. So I actually just said right before I flipped randomly open, gave you the example of balance. How in a company there may be an opener and a closer, somebody at the front, somebody at the back end. When you're going through a life, when you're going through the experiences that come with your life, when your mind is making a record of those experiences, they're oftentimes imprinted onto our mental surfaces by extremes of emotion. So when you're really sad or when you're really happy, and then there are phenomenon around that. One of my gifts as a healer or as a spiritual medium and divinator is a precognition. Sometimes I can precog things before I even know that I did it. So this is a good example when I just mentioned going through backgrounds, and then also talking about the historical notions of physiological and ontological status or spirits, and figuring out what that is. Is it terrifying? Is it amazing? Is it what is the nature of contact? What is the actual spiritual realm involved? On liquor stores, it says spirits, liquor and spirits. What kind of spirits are those versus the ones that we encounter in near-death experiences at temples, synagogues, churches, in spiritual places like cemeteries where there may be a large presence of unresolved or memorials that have a lively presence around them because the spirits, the soul that is laid to rest there does as well. Those things intrigue a lot of people. And when you're thinking about balance spiritually, you have to figure out for yourself the limits that you've got. And if you do have limits, what those limits and boundaries look like. I could say, okay, I'm not okay with, and for a while I genuinely, had a strange feeling going past cemeteries. It was a actual thing. And so maybe my boundary would be, I will spend X amount of time in the cemetery and then I've got to go. Or for family and friends, I will spend time in the cemetery, but not for acquaintances. That's a boundary that some people have. Other people may have boundaries that are more like, I will not let other people's opinion about me affect the way that I function towards myself or others. Or maybe a boundary financially, or maybe a boundary in a relationship, romantically or otherwise. There's different ways that these things come through. But what my main kind of what I'm trying to get to here is that when you have something, a gift that other people don't necessarily experience or know how to manage, and you're trying to figure it out by yourself, there's not a right or a wrong answer. So you can't say there's only one way to make 5. You can try, but there's also a whole lot of proofs in a whole bunch of different ways. So when I think about balance and the universe as it pertains to my life, just zoom it all down there. There's a funneling of energies that will come towards you in different ways. And it's just a game of figuring out, not a game, but it is a game. You're supposed to have fun doing it. A game of figuring out what works for you and what does not. So I can channel with the cards, with tarot cards. I could channel with my actual pendulum. I could channel just from audio clairvoyancy or visual clairvoyancy or whatever the case may be. Some of that is not relevant when I'm trying to transfer knowledge or information from a book that I'm not familiar with. So obviously you just saw me flip randomly. There's no way that every random flip is going to be relevant, but it may be relevant in 5 minutes. So that's just, when you're thinking about balance, think about it from every perspective. What if you were the speed of light and you could either be behind, in line with, or in front of balance? What would it look like to you? What would balance look like at every point in time if it was an actual entity? And here it mentions, what is the spirit of something? So when you think about intentions, it's kind of your soul purpose, or the meaning that you're trying to put behind something is an intention. And although the dictionary has its own limitations, the definition of a supernatural, incorporeal, rational being or personality, usually regarded as imperceptible at ordinary times to the human senses, but capable of becoming visible at pleasure, and frequently conceived as troublesome, terrifying, or hostile to mankind. So when you think about these things, when you read these things anywhere, whether it be online or in a book, or whether it's just a channeling that you get for yourself that kind of catches you off guard and is a little bit off color to what you would have expected, there may be a message that is imperceptible to you at that time. It's almost like that is what precognition is an imperceptible kind of sixth sense, not that you're seeing dead people, but that your brain is going through a small death, which in French could sound like la petite mort, which is like a small orgasm. And it's like an epiphany, an aha moment where the light goes on and you're able to get a glimpse of what is to come. So when you're judging your own balance, or you're judging other people's balance, or when you're unable to see the balance within your own self, even if things feel chaotic or hectic, then you're also missing part of the point. Because at every juncture, the universe is trying to rebalance us exactly where we need to be. So if you have that inherent belief that you will be where you need to be at any given moment, that you're capable of precognition, of almost a supernatural sense of spiritual essence being around or in the ethers with you, you'll get more and more sensitive and more perceptive to those small, it's like the imbalances have chords or something that you could almost hear. They're imperceptible to some people, but when you sit quietly and read a book, or when you sit quietly and ask your spirit guides to amplify those inner voices, you can very much so make a trail. It's kind of like a Hansel and Gretel trail of small sweet spots stepping stones for your next movements spiritually. And I think it's, also worthwhile. I mentioned yin and yang. And the thing about positive and negative is that when you look at it like that, that's going to always be your currency, I guess you could say. When you're not looking at it in such a parenthesized or parenthetical kind of way, it can become much more of a reality. So the main black and white has gray spaces between it. It can when you mix them together, or it could just be black and white. Up and down, sweet and sour. There's so many different on or off, forward or backwards. He loves me not. All of these things are paradoxical existences. So when you think about, I don't know if you guys have seen that movie, The Cloverfield Paradox, but it's very interesting when you're thinking about dimensional shifts. Same thing, kind of, they have like a moment that's a little bit Hitchhiker Guide to the Galaxy moment, or they just kind of become like the dimensional frequency of the ship changes, and just watch it. Anyway, main purpose of saying the yin and yang bit was not to give you the idea that there's only two ways of being. To give you the idea that there may be one drop of black in the white and one drop of white in the black. But in the long run, would you really be able to tell that with the naked eye? So there's this precognition that potentially there's been contamination, If you're contaminating everybody with love, that's great. If you're contaminating everybody with something called love that looks a lot like hatred, that's not okay. I promise you that people who we would dub as bad people from the past actually were doing what they thought was best at the time. I doubt whole revolutions of people, whole generations of people just believed everything horrible that they could believe, just because they could. I think the general understanding that humans are trying to do our best at any given moment is typically a pretty solid and positive place to stand. But also, it goes both ways. So, can't be dumb and think that everybody has your best interest and your same intentions in mind. When you're holding your intention, you're like, oh my God, I gotta drop it. Not necessarily always a good idea to hand it to somebody else to hold. Sometimes that's your only option. But if you keep an open mind to both, then maybe you could have a better idea of whether that cross-contamination is really contamination or whether it's cross-pollination. Because when the bees die, we all die. And that's balance, like ecosystem balance. Once we poison the last well of fresh water, we are all going to start fighting over water. Fresh water. Clean, fresh water. We already bottled water. We've already bottled air. We put love on the tube. This little tube right here. We've done some pretty amazing, extraordinary things as humans. But just because you can do something doesn't mean necessarily that you should. And that balance is, I think, something that we've kind of lost, even between men and women. We now have the when Harry met Sally paradigm. There are a lot of friendships that I would have missed, a lot of knowledge that I really needed for every portion of myself to be who I am, if I had been limited to one gender, being friends with only one gender. So even if you're just like friends with your your peers at work, or you're at school, or whatever the case may be, the friendship with both genders gives you a perspective that you can then make your own opinion from, so you have something to offer. I think it's kind of like going to school to read books when books are on the bookshelf at the library, or you can pick them up for a number of dollars, potentially one or two on the weekends at thrift stores. Might not be exactly what you're looking for, but it's still knowledge. It's still something that you would not have had prior to picking up that book. So I think that's the point of balance. I think it's not, sometimes it's looking at the negative, sometimes it's looking at the positive. Sometimes you need a negative shift. Maybe if you're unhappy at a job or in a relationship, you need to end that prior to the happiness coming back around again. So there's this small friction that you have to cause in order to have any kind of actual building blocks for the future. Does that make sense? So it's valuable to take inventory constantly and to be aware of your pre-existing thoughts, your precognitions about what's going to happen, or to put time and effort into thinking about the things that have already taken place, so that you can either repeat those steps as protocol and procedure, or kind of remove them from your repertoire of activities. So, in any case, I think that's all I got about that at this moment in time. But if you'll give me one more moment in time, then I'll go ahead and do these tarot card reads for balance, just to follow this up and kind of give us, I'll take this with me. We'll take this with. Okay? Okay. Great. So I'll call this balance installment 2, since I do think I want to put the first read up as well.